The final step in preparing your pelts is boarding or nailing them up to dry. Beaver are dried in an oblong pattern that follows the contour of the body without overstretching or thinning the pelt. NAFA offers a very concise template so you can draw those patterns on your drying boards. Traditionally, beaver sizes were broken down in 5-inch increments with measurements taken from side to side and nose to tail and added together. More typically now, they are measured on a light table and calculated in square inches. The template patterns for the boards are between the 5-inch grade tolerances so as to accommodate for shrinkage when the pelt is drying. There are a couple of ideas for transferring the template to your boards. One method for quick reference is using different colors for the different rings.
This is a beaver board with a uniform pattern from a NAFA over here. And see, all the rings are marked. Different color when we grade the beaver to check which size they are.
Boarding and drying beaver takes a fair amount of space. Unless you have a lot of room, you'll need a system to make things more efficient. The most common is a boarding table that is sized to fit your boards and allows you to use both sides of the board.
The board, it's a 4 feet by 8 feet plywood board, 3/4 inch thick, the thickness. So make sure that the nails go good in them. If you take it too narrow, it's going to wobble. So 3/4 inch is good. And when you buy your sheet of plywood, it's 4 feet by 8 feet. And there is a 96-inch long, so you can do 3 boards. Every board is 32-inch long. So after that, you prepare your beaver. You put the head on this side. That's going to go on the bottom of your board when you hang up to the ceiling. You tack it on the floor so the hair goes straight, and after that, you bring it to the ceiling. So that's your board. You go there, you put the first beaver, you grade it, and then you pin it to the board. When you're done the first one, just turn it around along the edge, and it goes underneath, and you do the second one to maximize the board. And after you're all done, you take the beaver, the head is towards you give it a tug so the hair go straight. After that, you take it, you hang it on the ceiling to get dry in your first shed.
And there are some very space-saving efficiencies that may be helpful and other tips to make the job a little easier. Jim Gibb has a design for a very space-efficient beaver table. It just folds up and stores out of the way and is great for using at camp where space is limited. Easy to put up and takes very little storage space. Plans are simple and materials inexpensive, just some 1x4 and butter strap hinges. The full set of plans will be posted on the NAFA website for anybody wanting to build one. Another great idea that Jim Gibb does is putting the 3 smaller sized beaver templates on one side of the standard size 32x48 inch board. If you do this, you have to put a single pattern on the opposite side and put your beaver up on that side first. Flip it over and you can put 2 smaller beaver on the other side. Another convenient adaptation is using the table with a frame that rotates. Just stand in one place and nail it up. Another tip is marking the top of your board so the pelts on both sides are the same direction. So when they are drying, the heads are both facing down. At some point, you'll have to close up the leg holes. Jackie Wurr sews them shut before he nails up.
All you need to do is get underneath and grab a piece of the skin. You don't have to go all the way through in order to do it.
If you choose to sew the legs, this can also be done on the board. First, grab your pelt by the nose and give it a couple of good snaps. This helps take any remaining sawdust or fat chunks out of the fur. It also loosens the pelt for easier stretching and causes the fur to stand up off the pelt. There are several ways to judge which ring to start your nailing. First is a board which you have marked. That translates the length of the pelt to the ring in size. Carl Hunter measures the length of the pelt and deducts 4 inches. He then finds a ring in the pattern closest to that number, but not over it.
So I hang on by my finger like this. I take my tape measure and I put it right there. And I measure the length of my pelt. Okay, I've got roughly 36 inches, okay? I can't stretch that at 36 inches because if I do that, then I got no width. I have to make this symmetrical. So I deduct 4 inches. 4 inches will be enough to compensate for my nose and allow me to stretch the width I need. So from line to line, I try to find one that's 36 or in that area. I have one that's a little better than 32, so that gives me a reference point to start on.
Or the way Jackie Wurs uses.
You try and grab it at the nose end that you did never cut off, and in the center of your tail. You try to look in the middle of your 2 legs where the center would be. When you go to stretch it, just hold it nice and snug. Don't overstretch it, just nice and snug. And once you have your pinpoint of your circles that you're going to do, always come back 2 rings. Always. Your beaver will fit perfect every time.
Remember these key points when handling your beaver. Use a NAFA pattern to mark your drying boards. Don't overstretch your beaver. Better to go down a size than up. There are all types of nails out there, and it's just a matter of preference. Most guys like the thin shank broadhead nail, called a box nail. These come in a variety of sizes. The number 6 box seems to work well. Using regular steel galvanized nails will be impossible to pull and often tear the pelt. Also, never let your nails get wet, or the rust will make them rough and tear the pelt as well. The natural oils and grease that build up on them over the years will keep them workable for nailing beaver. If you like a Cadillac, then the number 6 box is also available in stainless steel. It never rusts and never gets rough. There are some handlers that are now using staples to board their beaver. We don't recommend it for a number of reasons.
In some sections, the new fad is using staples. And if you want to use staples, I don't have a problem with that. But when you take your beaver off the board, make sure that all the staples are taken out. These are very, very hard on the fingers. My personal opinion on staples, I don't like it. For the very reason is I get cut so many times with them. You get some of these trappers who won't pull those staples out of the mouth area, and that's where you grab a beaver. If you staple a beaver, which now, because the staple's now on the board, what happens if your beaver's, the fur is still moist?
Well, staples could cause damage in the pelts. Our fleshing department, where the knife will hit the staple, and then the knife will have a nick in it, and if the flesher goes to take another cut, he will make a ritz in the pelt, which is damaging the pelt.
Stretch the nail, the tail, and lips as far out on the board as you can. This will keep the edges tight so they can be scraped easier.
The lips, right on the outside edge of the lip. That's why it's good to have left a little meat on it. Same thing on the tail. Pull the widest part of the tail out.
Take your round or single-edged scraper and clean all the edges of the pelt. Make sure you drag downward on the pelt. Take your fine fur comb and go around the whole edge of the pelt, brushing out the underfur and any sawdust or grease that may still be in the fur. Just a little brushing makes a difference in the appearance of the edges of the pelt once they're dry. Next, remove the long stretches and nail on the ring halfway between the nails already in the pelt. At this point, you should have 8. Now, start nailing halfway in between the nails already in the pelt. If you go around the pelt once, your nails should total 16. Don't set your nails too deeply. They should have some give to them, so when the pelt dries, it won't tear the edges.
Once I'm at that point, now I'm going to work my way all the way around the front. I start here. About every inch, And I've already got my pattern lined out. Almost as fast as a staple gun.
Now, as you look at the pelt, you'll be able to see where you need more nails. They should be spaced about 1 inch apart, or just enough to get one finger in between them. You'll need the 1 finger space for pulling the nails. As you go around the pelt, you can adjust the separation, and you may need to move some nails. I like to start on the side of the pelt and work my way around the head to the other side. This is where you'll most likely need some extra pelt. If the tail isn't nailed, you can pull your loose pelt up from there and not overstretch it.
And again, as you're getting towards the tail, you've got a little bit of an irregularity in the body shape there. So you can just come in. This is the weakest part of the beaver. It's right around the vent on the pelt. So I try to come in beyond that. So if this dries and it pulls, it doesn't tear right there.
You can tell if you're overstretching by the white streaks on the pelt.
Leave that outside your nail line. The weakest part, get in beyond it a ways.
Once the pelt is nailed to the pattern, you can now use your round or single-edged scraper to clean up any fat pockets that you might have missed in the fleshing. This is a good time to get any extra sawdust that you left from the drumming. This style scraper is very important for cleaning up your beaver. Let's take a minute to see how to keep it sharp. Greg Cole shows the 2 edges of the scraper. The beveled side is out and the flat edge on the inside. Always sharpen on the bevel edge. Greg shows that often just using the back of your skinning knife to knock down the burr and stand it back up is all you need to do, same as if using the fleshing knife. If it needs a stronger touch-up, use a ceramic or smooth steel to bring the edge back from very dull. Greg uses a diamond steel first, then ceramic. You should try to keep it at about a 25-degree angle when using the sharpeners. When you have the right edge back, then stand up the burr and burnish it on one side. If you haven't sewn the legs, you'll need to close them up along with any large holes in the pelt. There are several ways to do this. These can be sewn on the board, which gives them a neat appearance, nailed or banded, or a combination if you'd like. If you nail your legs, be sure they're trimmed to keep them tight, and don't fold any of the legs over the pelt. This is the perfect place for the pelt to taint.
I take my nails and I nail the leg hole shut. Pinching a little bit, not too much because it won't dry if you overlap too much. I like to push the hair back in underneath just for looks. You can leave it open, they look better if they're closed. Take a nail, push the hair in underneath, overlap.
You don't want to have this pulled over onto the other side of the leather here because there's a very good possibility if your drying conditions are not correct, these will rot.
Another method is using rubber bands. This gives the same appearance as sewing. The key is cutting them off at the right time, usually about 2 or 3 days into drying the pelt. Pull the rubber bands and the legs underneath will be slightly wet. This is what you want. Cut off the legs and work the hide into the leg hole. Then allow the pelt to dry for another day. If you intend to have your beaver tan for wall hangings, you should leave the ears intact. There are often buyers at the auction looking for pelts suitable for this purpose. If you choose to leave the ears intact, they must be cleaned of all the fat and cartilage. If the cartilage is left in and it dries and they're missed by the tannery, it'll damage their fleshing knives. Properly cleaned ears take some time to prepare.
It damages some of our equipment when the cartilages are left in the ears.
Most trappers choose to remove the ears. They're often the hardest part of the pelt to dry and the first place to taint. This can be done at several points in the handling process, and when the pelts reach the tannery, it is one of the first steps in the tanning process. It's also a great chance for us fur handlers to understand more of the overall process and adapt what we do to accommodate the needs of the folks down the pipeline. You can use a small homemade tool like this or pull the ears through and cut them off, then nail the hole shut.
Sometimes don't dry and they will taint. And if you have your beaver stacked or they're in a stack and this is against the pelt of another beaver, it could cause taint on the other pelt.
Or some handlers use a punch. Cutting off the ears could also be done when you're fleshing the pelt. This is important because if left on, it takes longer to dry the pelt, and if not dry, the ears taint very easily. This may also result in damage to other pelts stacked with them or stored for shipping. Very few graders miss the smell of a taint, and also very few will take the time to find out what part of the pelt is tainted. If they smell taint, it's graded as tainted. Even if it's just the ears, they'll grade it as a damaged pelt. Last step is trimming the nose and tail. Just go around the head and take off the lips and heavy fat. The same applies to the tail. Then take your scraper and clean up any fat, sawdust, or gristle left behind on the hide. Be careful scraping over old scars. It's easy to open them up. Now you can go around the whole pelt and lift it off the board about halfway up the nails. This promotes much better air circulation and reduces drying time. It also allows for the hide to pull the nails in toward the center as it dries, keeping them from tearing on the nail holes. One more brushing will really help the appearance of the edges. Remove the boarded beaver from the table or jig and hold it head down and drop it several times. This evens out the pelt and will cause the guard hairs to stand up some.
And I always give them a good whack. Now the hair on the beaver just went, and that's nice and fluffy, so when I take it off, you don't have to comb.
The pelt should be loose on the board to allow for shrinkage.
A 4-inch sag. With the 4-inch sag, it means that it's perfectly stretched.
If you're nailing on both sides of your board, turn it over and put it back on the table. Lay out the new pelt and begin the process. Remember, you want to keep both pelts facing head down when drying. Place the boards in an area with lots of air circulation.
Secret of drying fur is a lot of air. Gotta move a lot of air.
This is important, and there are several ways to do this. One of the easiest setups I have seen is this simple frame. Line up your boards in front of the fan. The temperature should be around 55 to 60 degrees, and drying should take 3 to 4 days.
This has a tendency of being a thicker layer of fur. This will dry harder than it will here. And it'll rip here before it will here, so you want to dry it more. Your hotter air is always up. And when I do it at home, I always have, the secret of drying fur is a lot of air. Gotta move a lot of air. And you have a consistency of drying your beaver when you blow your air like so. If you blow it from here, this beaver will dry, but this one won't. You can remove your beaver in 3 days, but if you want to have a good drying beaver that will keep its shape and everything, leave it on there for 4 days. But like I said, the secret is move a lot of air. Not hot air, cool air. Because hot air will make this shrink twice as fast, then you'll have a lot of ripped beaver. No matter how loose you've got it, they'll rip along the nails because you've used too much hot air. You dried your beaver too fast.
Never crank up the heat to dry beaver or get them close to the wood stove. This will break down the natural oils in the hide and result in what is called a burnt beaver. If you banded the legs on day 3, when most of the pelt is drying, unwrap the banded leg holes. They'll probably still be wet. Trim them with a pair of scissors and tuck the edges into the small hole. As the pelts are drying, wipe down the grease that seeps from the inside. If you have a few areas of heavy fat that might not be drying, use your sharpest knife and just lightly score the surface of the hide side of the pelt over the fat. This will break the crust and allow the area to dry better. Be sure not to leave your pelts on the boards too long. They can over-dry and tear along the nails. This will also happen if the nails are set too firmly. The white areas on the edge of the pelt are an indication of overstretching or overdrying. When the pelt is totally dry, and that includes even the fat areas, place the board back in its frame. First, go around the pelt and loosen it from all the nails. Take one location and slide your fingers in between the nails. Then, with a claw hammer, pull straight up on the head of the nail while holding the pelt down with your fingers. This will prevent the hide from tearing. The thinnest place and the most susceptible to tearing is between the hind legs and the bottom. You should only try to pull as many nails as you can hold down. Next, just work your way around the hide and take out the nails in the leg holes and ears. Another method is to use a block of wood as a fulcrum to pull up on the nails. Never remove pelts that are even a little wet. If they're still wet and you store them or pack them for shipping, they'll begin to mold. There is no other opportunity to dry the pelts in the grading and auction process. When the pelt is free, wipe off any excess grease on the hide side and then flip it over and brush out any remaining debris. Then, take your finer fur brushes to go over the pelt to clean and fluff it up. Beaver should be piled fur to fur, hide to hide. If you're holding on to them before shipping, keep the piles small and never allow them to get wet. Even high humidity and rainy weather can rehydrate the hides and cause them to start molding. Be sure all your fur is properly tagged and that you have all the paperwork. Untagged fur has to be returned to the shipper or seized by the authorities. The beaver should be bagged fur to fur and in bags without any other greasy hides like coons. Casters can also be placed in the bags with the pelts. Check with your local NAFA receiving agent for his drop-off locations or pickup schedule. This information is on the NAFA website.